Peace and love, family. Welcome to another Read Book Club discussion. Tonight we are discussing Chapter 11 of The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And family, you know who Richard Rothstein is. Brother T, you sent me a post that Dr. Boyce Watkins and even Lord Jamal, all of them, they put up this post that's circulating of Richard Rothstein talking about the suburbanization of the U.S. and how Black people were literally locked out, from the suburbs, and how, that impacted us today. And so that clip has gone viral. It's gone viral on IG. It's gone viral on TikTok. And so everybody's talking about it right now. And it's crazy because backstage, Brother T and I were talking about how when Yvette Carnell and what was the brother's name? Antonio Moore, they were having these conversations some years back. And I remember they used to always talk about Sandy Darity, Dr. Darity, and all of that. And they were having these conversations. But now, Brother T, as you stated backstage, people are having these conversations. People are asking questions. And so the information is getting out there. But you said backstage, Brother T, and I'm going to share it with the audience. You said people are asking, why is Black home ownership low? Why is there a disparity between the incomes of African American people and so-called classified, white folks, right? Like white people. Why is there a disparity, in income? And like you said, Brother T, you said if only they picked up the book.
Yep.
So we have these questions, and and then you don't if you don't read. These are things that you'll have questions about, right? And we can only answer our questions through study. It is important to study. When you want to know why something is happening today, you have to study and analyze what happened yesterday or yesteryear, right? And so go ahead, Brother T. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the listening audience, because I'll start preaching.
Hey, family. How you doing? Once again, thank you for joining us for another discussion. This Sunday, we're talking about the looking forward, looking back. I'm Brother T, co-host to the great Dr. Ma'at. You see Dr. Ma'at Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and Sunday at 7 p.m. And I'm glad to be here once again to discuss Chapter 11.
No, but Brother T, you got to tell the family where to catch you at, because I put your stuff under there, and you all over the internet, Brother T. So go ahead and let the people know where to find you.
Okay, guys, family, I'm known as JT Cornring on YouTube. It's a light channel, believe me. It's a very light channel. It's my introduction to coins, silver and gold. And what I do, I take silver and gold coins and I turn them to rings, wearable rings. Something I've been doing for the last 3 years. I know people who went over there like, hey, I don't see him talking about Chapter 11. You won't on that channel. But real soon, I'll do an offshoot and talk about important issues. But that is kind of my hobby that I turned to a business. And I just hit, I think, 5,000 subscribers. And one of my videos.
Oh, which platform? Which platform, Brother
T? I went on YouTube. 5,000, going on 6,000 subscribers now.
Go ahead, Brother T.
One of my videos on all platforms equals 700,000 views. So I was pretty happy about that. It's a hobby that I love doing.
And you do it well, Brother T.
I appreciate
you do it well, Brother T. And so I learned a lot from Brother T and family. That's why we're reading these books, The Color of Law, The Color of Money. Brother T was telling me about this stuff back in 2018 when we founded the RAM, the Resurgence of the African Mind Book Club, and we were reading Blueprint for Black Power. And I noticed that he came with like a different perspective when we talked about certain things, and he put me on with The Color of Law, The Color of Money. He said, you got to read this, sis. I'm telling you. And so it sat on my bookshelf. And then, you know what? We started the R.E.A.D Book Club. I said, we know what? We're going to break it out. We're going to break out these books. And so a lot of the stuff that you all hear me talk about, I'm knowledgeable about that because of Brother T putting me on with these books that we're reading and that we're studying and discussing together. So Brother T, I couldn't thank you enough, just for these recommendations. Appreciate that.
Thank you for your platform, Dr. Mott.
I appreciate you, brother. And then, so look, family, let me tell you the books that we're going to read. And Brother T, you can get a pen out right now, and a pen and a piece of paper, or that may be old school. Grab your iPhone, okay, and go to the notes, Brother T, how in your iPhone. Look, I got them, but Brother T, nowadays, when you say get out the notes, students grab, their cell phones now. You're like, hold on, wait a minute. Oh, Doc, it's it's a note app on here where you can actually write your notes. I said, okay, so with the new school, they grab cell phones when it's time to write. Like you said, Brother T, we grabbing pencils and look, Brother T, we got pens and paper, we old school. So anyway, family, get out your pen and paper, okay, or your iPhone or your Android, and take down the names of these books that we will be reading next year, okay? And this is just what we're going to be starting off with, okay? It's 4 books. We're going to read They Were Her Property by, I believe the sister name is Dr. Stephanie Rogers. I think that's her name. So that is the first book we will be reading. They Were Her Property. And in that book, she's talking about, like, she argues that, half of the daggone slave masters were white women. And we never talk about that. Like, that's never depicted in movies, about slavery. Typically, you see white males or so-called white males, depicted as slave masters, right? Rarely do you see white women. It seems like her image is always protected, Brother T. But this sister, it was actually a sister who published a book, wrote and published a book. It's called They Were Her Property. And she outed white women. She talked about how brutal they were, and the tactics that they used were just as harsh as their male counterpart. And so we're going to unpack that, and we're going to discuss that in the top of the year. So that's the first book. The second book we're going to read is Slavery by Another Name. Slavery by Another Name. And Richard Rothstein actually mentioned that book in this book. And it's crazy because, Brother T, I actually purchased that book some years ago. It's just sitting on my bookshelf. I haven't read it, but I will be reading it with the R.E.A.D Book Club. All right. So Slavery by Another Name. And in this particular book, the author is talking about the Jim Crow era and giving us some facts, okay, that we may not be aware of regarding the Jim Crow era. The third book that we're going to read is When Affirmative Action Was White. So typically they say, oh, affirmative action was created for Black people, and maybe initially it was, but let's not act like it didn't later on start including minorities. So then white women became eligible for affirmative action. So we're going to unpack all of that. The book unpacks all of that. Okay, so When Affirmative Action Was White. And then the fourth book that we are going to read is From Here to Equality by Dr. William Sandy Darity. Okay, From Here to Equality. Okay, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century by Dr. William Sandy Darity. So just to repeat, family, the first book, They Were Her Property. Second book, Slavery by Another Name. Third book, When Affirmative Action Was White. And the fourth book, From Here to Equality. So make sure you grab those books, family, because we will be reading those books next year. And you never know. It may take us 4 months to get through them. It may take us the whole year. Who knows? But we're definitely going to read those books. So make sure you grab them. And when you grab them, family, go to a Black independent bookstore to get these books. Please don't, we don't have to give Jeff Bezos any more money than he already has, right? And so shout out to everyone's place. Call them in Baltimore, okay? Baba Nati and Mama Tabia, and tell them Dr. Ma'at sent you, okay? And grab these books. They ship around the country and they ship around the world, okay? Black and Nobel in Philadelphia. You have Positive Vibes down in, I think he's in Virginia. All right. And so make sure, family, make sure that you holler at these Black-owned bookstores. So I just want to take a quick moment out, Brother JT, to acknowledge our Ma'atian family is in the building. This is the Ma'atian family. So I see Steve is in the building. He says, greetings from St. Louis. And they talk about St. Louis a lot, Brother T, in this book. He uses Ferguson, as an example. And yeah, he talks about him a lot. So the Ma'atian family is in the building. We have, a beautiful mind. She's in the building, that Queen Mother. She says, peace and love, family. The Queen Warrior right there. You got Crystal Denise. She's going to be in the building. Peace and love. The Ma'atian family, Brother T, is in the building. The Ma'atian family. I see Brother Cliff. He said, good evening from Laurel, Maryland. Salute to you, Brother Cliff. He's in the building. Brother Gerald Meeks, peace and love to your warrior. I see you in the building. Kawaji White, peace and love to you, brother. He says, Dr. My, peace and love to the greatest woman on the earth besides my mother. Ashe, appreciate your words, King. Appreciate your words, King. And Kaka is brother in Swahili. So appreciate you, brother. Asante Sana for your words. I see brother Anthony Holly is in the building. Brother Gregory Turns is in the building. He says, Hotep to the fam. He says, Hotep to the fam. I see Robin Benton is in the building. Good evening. All right, getting ready, getting to the root of it all. All right, he said, peace and love, family. Peace to your family. Uh-oh, I knew the goddess was going to be in the building, Brother T. Goddess Yemi Ya. That's the goddess right there. She must be an Ephi sister. Let me know because she said Yemi Ya. She must be an Ephi sister over there. But peace to you, Yaba. I see you. Yeah, absolutely, Crystal Denise. Absolutely. We see one of the greatest moderators on YouTube. Sister Aquarius 79 is in the building. Peace to you. Dante McCormick is in the building. Yeah, they were her property. Yes, yes, yes. Stephanie Rogers, thank you. Yes, yes, yes. Brother Bay is in the building. Lama Bay said, peace, family. I'm trying to see who else is in the building I miss. I think I said Robin was in the building. I say Robin Benton. Robin Benton is in the building. Robin Benton said, wrote it down. There go my brother right there, Africa the Great. Uh-oh, look at what he said, Brother T. Shout out to Africa the Great. This brother always supporting the work, Brother T. Always supporting the work. He said, I'm going to donate 2 books from each one. Sis, let me know who to purchase them from. Ashe. Thank you so much. And, Brother Africa the Great, I'm going with everyone's place. Gotta support them in Baltimore. All right, I see Brother Young Blood Bay. John Young Blood Bay is in the building. He said, peace and love. Would there be a list of bookstores just in? Oh, absolutely. So everyone's place in Baltimore, family. You have Black and Nobel in Philly. You have Positive Vibes in Virginia. And these people ship around the world. All right. And so, family, let's get the views up. Let's share this discussion. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the legacy of government racial policy. So, Brother T, I'm going to hand the mic on over to you so you can start us off, warrior.
Yes, chapter 11. This is what we're discussing tonight. Looking forward, looking back. Ricard Rothstein started off the chapter talking about de jure segregation once again. And we know that segregation, that word meant de facto segregation, separation that exists even though laws do not require it, persists to be present today. So we basically know that some of these things happen to us that wasn't even in the law books, but it was enacted on us as if it was, right? So he started off the chapter. I'm going to go off on close to the second paragraph. He says, but the ending of de jure segregation of housing requires undoing past actions that may seem irreversible. Some of the things that happen to us, even if law was created to stop it, the repercussions of what happened is so long lasting. He made an example of, okay, if we could do like a bus boycott, okay, next week we can sit in whatever seat that we want once the law has been put in place, correct? But the problems that happen because of job placement and not allowing us to make the money that was needed, and also not giving us the ability to buy homes with zero money down, and also as cheap as the houses were when they were given the FHA loans and things like that, and GI bills, and they was taking advantage of education. The lasting effect is what we see today.
That's right.
That's why we're in the slump economically that we're in today, because what was done there, even though laws were put into place, it was so devastating for us that we could not recover. So when you ask the question why a home loans and buying homes at a low rate. And if you ask the question, why do we make less than white counterparts? Go back to these chapters and understand the de jure segregation and these laws that were not put in place but were enacted on, which caused us to be in the destitute economic state that we are presently in. So he goes on to say President Kennedy's 1962 executive order attempted to end financing of residential segregation by federal agencies. In 1966, President Lyndon Johnson pushed to have housing discrimination bill passed, but in a rare legislative defeat, the Senate killed his proposal.
Mm.
2 years later, civil rights advocates tried again, and this time the Senate eked out the Narrow to Margin the Fair Housing Act that prohibited private discrimination in housing sales and rentals. Now, shortly after, pressured the national emotion followed the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in April of 1968. The
Mm-hmm.
House Representatives enacted the law for the first time since 1883,
Mm.
when the Supreme Court rejected Civil Rights Act's ban on housing. Okay, so housing discrimination. Government endorsed the rights of African Americans to reside wherever they choose and could afford. Now, this law is now half century old. You may think that 50 years will be long enough to erase the effects of government promotion of support of segregation, but the public policies of yesterday still shape the racial landscape of today.
Say that one more time, Brother T. Say that one more time. I didn't hear you.
But the public policies of yesterday still shape the racial landscape of today.
Mm. So this is three things I heard while you were talking. Three things I heard. One, you were saying that so the first bullet point is that you mentioned how, and this is the example that you gave regarding the bus boycott.
Mhm.
You were saying, you were talking about like the lasting effects of these government racial policies. And you were saying that when you compare the racial policies, so regarding the bus boycott, you said once you create a policy to end it, you end it. But with residential segregation, it's not that easy. Once you end it, it's not like the consequences or the consequences of those racial policies end as well. You know what I mean? It's kind of like with bus boycott. You know, we boycott. We want to sit on the front of the bus with white folks. They say, oh, they pass a policy, and then we're sitting on the front of the bus, right? But when they pass a policy such as the Fair Housing Act, okay, and they say we can no longer discriminate against African Americans in the housing market, and they can live wherever they want to live, and blah blah blah. Once that policy was passed or enacted, it didn't fix the long lasting consequences of having been locked out. It didn't fix it. You know, it's like today, like you just ended with, those racial policies of yesterday still shape or still impact what's happening today. That's one thing. That's what I heard. Another thing I heard you say, Brother T, when you were going through, you talked about Kennedy and how they proposed it with Kennedy, it got shot down. Then Lyndon B. Johnson and them, I believe it was passed then. But they passed it after Dr. King was assassinated. So here, this is what I'm hearing, how they pacify us, Brother T, with policies. So they tried to do it with John F. Kennedy and pushed it, but they didn't push it until after Dr. King. Dr. King was assassinated in April of 1968, and they passed it a couple of days later. You know why they passed it? To pacify black people, because black people were turning up. Black people were around here burning it down, shutting it down. It was off the chain. So how they pacify us with policies. So that's another point that I heard, another takeaway that I got from you. A third takeaway that I got from you is, again, I'm hearing justice delayed is justice denied. Dr. King said that. Justice delayed is justice denied. So eventually, something was passed to end the discrimination against black people in the housing market, but the damn damage is done already. So justice delayed has been justice denied. That's what I heard, Brother T. Go ahead.
You definitely heard everything, Dr. Ahmad. And Dr. King also stated when he realized that economics was the issue. He said, is what use would it be to have a seat at the table if you can't afford the meal?
Hold on, say that again.
What use to sit at the table if you can't even afford the meal?
Come
So
on.
he understood that, hey, yes, we now can sit in the front of the restaurant, we can sit in the front of the bus, but it goes a lot deeper. See, the thing you pointed is that after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they pacified us with this policy.
Yes.
If they enacted this policy when he was living, he could direct it based off his new vision. It would now be, hey, remember, you gave them land, you're giving us houses, but you also gave them the money to buy the land, which you can also give us the money to buy the houses.
Come on.
So he could have put a clear vision. They stopped him because they knew where he was going. He made
Yeah.
this talk basically before he was assassinated because he
Yes.
knew all of the things that were given to other people. And what we needed was our check in order to move forward. So the pacification always came. They gave it, they had to give us something, but guess what? There was no clear direction how it should have been done and what we could have done with it to change our situation today.
Absolutely, Brother T. And that's why I had to wear our reparations for black people. I've been rocking this shirt. Reparations for black people, black society's top priority is economic empowerment. And guess what it says on the sleeve? Cut the check. Cut the daggone check. Cut the check. So anyway, Brother T, shout out to Be More Codified for my t-shirt. And so appreciate that, Brother T. And so in this chapter, we see a lot of, we're getting a lot of receipts as to why reparations, because people keep saying, we can do it on our own. We don't need no reparations. Let's just pull together our money. Pull together what money? Pull together what money if 51% of black people are living at or below the poverty line? What disposable income are we gonna pull together to build the nation? And I'm not saying, Brother T, that we shouldn't pull our resources, what resources we do have together. But what I'm saying to you is that they have put us in a very um I'm trying to look for the word. I don't know if I want to say pernicious or nefarious. I'm trying to think of the adjective that I want to use, Brother T. But I'll just go say bad. A terrible economic situation. You get what I'm saying? And so with the resources that we do have, yes, let's pull together. But I mean, damn, Brother T, if someone is going to cut me a check, I'm going to take it. I'm going to let you know that right now. They cut a check, I'm taking it. I'm not going to be sitting over there, Brother T. We don't need that white man's money. I'm taking the check. I'm taking the check and I'm going to go ahead and continue to work to advance our people. But in this book, Brother T, there are a lot of receipts for why reparations is owed and necessary. And so anyway, Brother T, you at the top of 178, brother. Where are you?
Top of 178, Dr.
Oh,
Mike.
I see where we are. So it says where other civil rights laws have fallen short, the failures have been in implementation and enforcement, not in concept. So Dr. Amos Wilson talked about that in his book, The Falsification of African Consciousness. And so I repeated what he said. Laws and policies are words on paper. They are only as good as the people who enforce them. But I love how Richard Rothstein talked about implementation too. So let's add to that. They are only as good as the people who implement and enforce those laws and those policies. And so, he goes on, Brother T. I love how he talks about ending, school segregation. So he gets into that. He said, ending school segregation was much harder. He said, but how to achieve it was clear. You had, districts, they could revise local school attendance, boundaries so that children of either race could attend their neighborhood schools, and districts could upgrade the lower quality schools that African Americans had attended so that all facilities would be equal. So he says certainly there was massive resistance after 1954 when the Supreme Court ordered the dismantling of separate black and white school systems. Yet, in principle, school segregation in most locales was easy. It says, and if achieving it the next day was politically difficult, the time required should have been a matter of years, not decades. Right. So I love this footnote that he puts down here. He says whether or not African Americans were entitled to compensation for having received inferior and unconstitutional education prior to 1954 is an important issue, but not the subject of the book. I agree. Because when I read this paragraph, and even when I was reading in previous chapters, when he talked about school segregation and he talked about us receiving an inferior education and how we had underfunded schools, which we still have today. We still have it. Nothing has changed. Are we owed reparations for that? Absolutely. Because typically when people think about reparations, slavery is the first thing that comes to their mind. But it's not just slavery, Brother T. It's slavery. It's Jim Crow, semi-slavery, as Dr. Claude Anderson would say. So you have Jim Crow, semi-slavery. Then you have these policies, and laws that were passed. You get what I'm saying, Brother T, that adversely impacted our community, inferior education, so school segregation. So yes, we are owed reparations because we suffer from, what they title an educational debt. That's what they call it. It's a book by, I think, Ladson and Billings that talks about how African Americans suffer from, an educational debt. Okay. And so we're owed reparations for that. So moving on to the top of page 179, he says, as it has turned out, schools are more segregated today than they were 40 years ago. Facts. Facts. Why, Brother T? Because remember, because the school zoning, we got to go to our zone school. And so if you live in a predominantly black neighborhood and your zone school is up the street, then your school is going to be predominantly what? Black, right? And it's the same thing for white folks. So it says that, schools are just as segregated today as they were 40 years ago. But this is mostly because the neighborhoods in which schools are located are so segregated. Facts. We still segregated. You get what I'm saying? And so, of course, the schools will still be segregated. So it says in 1970, the typical African American student attended a school in which 32% of the students were white. By 2010, this exposure had fallen to 29%. Okay. And it says it is because of the neighborhood segregation that African American students are more segregated in schools in states like New York and Illinois than they are anywhere else. Throughout the country, not just in the South, busing of school children was almost the only tool available to create integrated schools because few children lived near enough to opposite race peers for any other approach to be feasible. Were housing segregation not pervasive, school desegregation would have been more successful. Facts. So he goes on to talk about the FHA, the Fair Housing Act. And he said this allowed us to resettle in white suburbs, right? And so now black people can move whatever they want to move. But it's a problem there, Brother T. And you talked about that earlier when you said they gave us a seat at the table, but how can what good is a seat at the table, you said, if I can't afford the meal? So now they say, and when was the Fair Housing Act passed, Brother T? What year was that? I'm pretty sure that was the early 1960s. Was that 64?
Yes, it says it here that it was passed, narrows the
No,
margin of Fair
68.
Housing Act
68.
68, right? 68,
68.
the death of Dr. Martin
Now
Luther
they
King
came.
Jr.
So 68. So now they've been literally locking us out, okay, from 1968, but we're gonna say post emancipation. So emancipation, post emancipation, all the way to 1968. So we looking at when he signed it, 1863. So from 1863, but I want to say 1865 because remember we got Juneteenth. The word didn't get around until about 2 years later. So from 1865 to 1868, we've been locked out. So nearly a century. And now you say Oh, you can go live in the suburbs. Hell, I can't afford to live in the suburbs. My grandmama can't afford it. She had to, my grandmother, and this is, and shout out to my FBA brothers and sisters in the building. They know what I'm talking about. Our grandparents who were born in the 30s, okay? Grandma couldn't get out of high school because she had to work on, my grandmother would say, the tobacco. She said the tobacco farm, the tobacco farms. So my grandmother, I think my mother and them, I want to say in the family first, they said it was a sixth grade education. Then my mother said eighth grade, and somebody said fourth grade. But we know that my grandmother, did not finish high school. And shout out and salute to my mother. My mother grew up to become a daggone teacher. And guess what, Brother T? When my mother was putting in that work in her 20s, okay, working at Harvard Institute, which was for adults. You remember back in Baltimore, Harvard Institute, you can go to night school, get your GED, learn how to read and all of that. My mother used to work nights there and taught her mother how to read and write. You get what I'm saying, Brother T? So our grandparents, they had to drop out of school. They had to drop out of high school to work on tobacco farms, right? When they were younger, couldn't finish school. So that's why they made sure that the boomers finished. Remember, the boomers would always tell you, our parents would tell us, we had to go to school. We had to go to school. We had to finish high school. We had to get our education because our grandparents could not do it. So they made sure that our children did it. So the boomers were the first generation that really, I'm talking about collectively, graduated from high school. A lot of them went on, to go to college, and then they pushed my generation to go to college. And that's how that happened. But grandma and granddaddy couldn't afford a house in the suburbs by the time the FHA passed because they had been locked out. Their incomes have been suppressed, right? They were unable to accumulate wealth, right? And so they couldn't move. So he gives us this chart, Brother T. You see these bullets at the bottom of page 179. He said, well, Black folks couldn't move into the suburbs. Why? One, he said parents' economic status. He said parents' economic status is commonly replicated in the next generation. So once government prevented African Americans from fully participating in the mid 20th century free labor market, depressed income became for many a multi-generational trait. What are we saying right here in this paragraph? What is he saying in this paragraph? You inherit the social economic status of your parents. So guess what, Brother T? A lot of these children who were born to Black athletes and entertainers who have these million. So look at Jada Pinkett and Will. Willow Smith is living in a $2 million mansion right now. Why? She inherited the social economic status of her parents. That's why. If you read the book, The New Jim Crow by Dr. Michelle Alexander, she tells us in her book that we only have a 12.5% chance to move up for upward mobility. So you're moving from poor to middle, 12.5%. Middle to upper, 12.5%. You only have a 12.5% for upward mobility. So almost an 88% chance that literally the social economic status or family, your family that you born into, that is what you're going to remain in. And so that's what he's talking about in that first bullet. Second bullet, he says, the value of white working and middle-class families, suburban housing appreciated substantially over the years. Wait a minute. So they bought the house, Brother T. He tells us in the book at roughly between $8,000 and $10,000, right? Which is about $75,000 in today's market. That's what he says. But T, it appreciated today. So $75,000 in today's market was what they got back in the day. But today, those same $75,000 houses, Brother T, are worth $350,000. So if you want to move in there, you can't come in there with $75,000. You got to get a loan for $350,000, right? And then you got to put down 20% of $350,000.
This was not that down payment was not a requirement for those whites to move in that suburbs when it was their time to move in.
Come on.
So now we have to move without education. with the jobs, but we now live in the house that we got to put $20,000 down,
Come on.
and we paying a mortgage for our house that's $350,000 when they got the house for $75,000. They took that 200,000. The white family took the 200,000 and put Kimmy and Tom through college. Also did parental welfare and probably gave about $25,000 to Kimmy's and Tom's children as gifts for their start, all from getting the benefits of living in that suburban house.
Come
So it's
on.
finally passed off to us, and we have no equity in the house because all the resources left. We think about Mr. Jim Jerry Jones, and let's talk about him for 1 second. I just
Come on, let's
want to
go.
take a quick detour. All Jerry Jones did was a half-hearted, not even an apology. Just he just made a statement. We think about, oh, well, Jerry didn't do anything. He was just in the picture. At that time, he was in Little Rock, Arkansas, during a time that there was segregation in that school. Blacks were now being a part of it. He was sitting on the side. But do anyone know that little Jerry Jones' father owned two grocery stores at that time? Pat's Market.
Teach T.
Okay. And that he also lived in a home that I'm sure had restrictive covenants because there was no blacks in that neighborhood at that time. So he lived in a segregated community with benefits. His father was well off because he owned the supermarkets.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say he didn't do anything, he benefited from the privilege of being white and well-to-do. So they always sells the picture. Oh, little Jerry Jones worked hard in his dad's two supermarkets. He was a star at the high school playing football. So all these privileges this man had with no obstacles in his way, benefits of his whiteness. So when we say he's a billionaire today based off his yesteryear, the foundation of no obstacles, and as the book put a new word inside my vocabulary, the word is, give me a 1 second, 1 second, family.
Nah, you go ahead.
A
Go ahead and look for it.
desperate impact. Desperate impact.
A
This is
disparate.
thank you. Disparate impacts.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something totally new based off what we had to go through. We had repercussions and more obstacles. What he went through was nothing. He was able to move out that neighborhood in Little Rock to go to another neighborhood. We moved in, resources left out. So he was able to take all that wealth built for them two supermarkets, one that was burned down, go to another city, invest in land, invest in more bigger businesses, and he became the Jerry Jones we see today, the bigot. So we got to understand one life allowed them to benefit from all the things. We had to endure segregation, keeping us from the things that we needed to become fruitful, especially economically.
Facts. All facts, brother T. And Gregory, I agree with you, Warrior. It says the Yurugu has a 400-year head
Good stuff.
start on Africans in America.
Mm-hmm.
Facts. Facts, a 400-year start. And speaking of the Yurugu, shout out to Baba Mwalimu Barudi, my spiritual, I call him my spiritual Baba, and his wife, his divine complement, my spiritual Baba and my spiritual mama. So no, they're not my biological parents, but I view them as my parents. Ashe. And so Baba will be coming on, family. I believe December the 14th. We're going to be talking about the nature of the Yurugu. I don't think our people, brother T, understand the nature of the people uh, whom we are dealing with. And so Baba Barudi will be on to talk about this. So if we understood the nature of these people, when that whole Balenciaga stuff happened, no
You
one
wouldn't
would
be
be
surprised.
surprised. You'd be
Wouldn't
like,
be
oh yeah,
surprised.
that's how they get down. Like,
Especially what they evolved to today.
come on, come
They
on.
evolved to the pedophilia. They evolved to all of the satanic. They putting it out in the open. There's no more hidden
Out, it
doors.
ain't nothing hidden no more.
Right.
Every,
This out in the open. Now they're saying, hey, we're going to put it right in your face.
right in your face.
And
And
we're going to
people,
have the babies holding it.
Come on, and our folks be sitting. If you study the history and the culture, shout
Hmm.
out to Nana Marimba Annie, right? Her book, The Yurugu, right? And this warrior elder, right? This warrior elder received a lot of criticisms when she dropped that book, a lot of death threats when she dropped that book, to the point where she just kind of like disappeared for a while. And she's very paranoid, and she don't come out, and like she don't deal with folks. She went through a lot to bring that information out to our people. And that's one book that we got to read. But Brother T, for the Read Book Club, I don't know, that is like one of them is one of those ones, Brother T. And Blueprint for Black Power wore us out. We was by after 8 months, everybody was like, whoa, we needed a break. So we would have to do something special to really study that book. But in that book, she talks about the history, the culture, the psychology of the Yurugu. And it's important that we understand that, so we know how to deal with them. All right. And so, like I said, if we understood the nature of these people, we wouldn't be shocked when we hear that they've done certain things or they say certain things. And we need to check the Yurugu that's inside of us. Ashe? Because a lot of us are walking around here black face Yurugu. And so we'll be able to identify that behavior within ourselves. But anyway, Brother T, going back to the book. So at the top of page 82, he talks about the Levittown homes. And so that's the analogy, family, that I was giving earlier. I was saying how these white folks purchased these homes that cost, roughly about $7,000 to $8,000 back in the day, which is equivalent to $75,000 today. But now these same homes are worth $350,000. So that's the Levittown homes, and we talked about that in previous chapters. And that was a development. I forgot the name of the dude. I know his name is Levitt, but I forgot his whole name. But he was a developer, and he developed projects in suburbs that were exclusively white. Okay. And they locked us out of that. And so he mentions that. And then Brother T kind of broke down, well, what happened? What did they do with the wealth that they incurred from their home appreciation? Like he said, they sent their children to college while we running around, Brother T, taking out loans, right? We taking out school loans to go to college. These white folks were tapping into the equity in their homes. Or, Brother T, when their children got married, they'll gift their children, here's $20,000, Johnny, that you can put down on a home. Our parents didn't do that. And not that they didn't want to. Our parents just, they weren't in the financial position to do that. They weren't in the financial position to pay for college, or in the financial position to say, here's 20, 30, 40, $50,000 for a down payment. Shout out to, and right now, Brother T, I'm thinking about The Hidden Cost of Being African American
Parental
by Thomas
welfare.
Shapiro.
Hmm.
Yeah, parental welfare. It's a whole chapter where he describes what white people do with the money. That's why the entire title, the full title of that book is The Hidden Cost of Being an African American: How Wealth Perpetuates Inequality. Because he talked about what white folks do with the wealth that they pass down from generation to generation. And that's why the pandemic hit us harder than it hit them. Because guess what, Brother T? They can go and pull equity out of their homes. Granddaddy got a paid off home for $350,000 that he got with his VA loan or his FHA loan that he didn't paid off, and they didn't pass that down. So they borrowing money from the home, pulling money out of equity, pulling money out of savings. And we're going to get to that, Brother T, because it's some data that talks about the monetary gifts that white people give their children. It was some data that was presented in the 80s, and he was saying that was the only data that they had, or the most the current data that he had. But they're ahead of us financially. And so anyway, Brother T, you kind of broke down, I believe, 182. So at the bottom, he says 70 years ago, many working in lower middle class African American families could have afforded suburban single family homes, right? It says with no down payment. Millions of whites did so, but working and lower middle class African Americans cannot now buy homes for the 350,000 and with more down payments of 20%, which is 70,000. 70,000. So at the end of this section, he says the Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibited future discrimination, but it was not primarily discrimination, right? Although this still contributed, that kept African Americans out of most white suburbs after the law passed. It was primarily unaffordability. Couldn't afford it. Okay. Couldn't afford it. And so you talk about reparations. Let's keep going. So it says primarily it was unaffordability. The right that was unconstitutionally denied to African Americans, the late 1940s, cannot be restored by passing the the Fair Housing Law that tells their descendants they can now buy homes in the suburbs if only they can afford it. The advantage that FHA and VA loans gave the white lower middle class in the 1940s and 50s has become permanent. So when you talk about the need for reparations and redress, this is a receipt, Brother T. This is a receipt. So moving to the next section, and I'll pass it to you. He says the reduction of discriminatory barriers in the labor market that began in the mid 20th century did not translate easily into African Americans' upward mobility. Movement from lower ranks to middle class in the national income distribution has always been difficult for all Americans. This reality challenges a fantasy we share that children born into low income families can themselves escape the status through hard work, responsibility, education, ambition, and a little luck. Let me say that again, Brother T. And I love the language that he used. He called it a fantasy. He called it as a myth. He's right. It is the American dream. It is a dream because he says right here that because of these barriers, right, that they put in front of us, he's talking about, he said, the reality challenges the fantasy that we share with our children. You can be anything. Little Ray Ray, all you have to do is go to school, get a good education. You're going to land yourself a good old job, little Ray Ray, and you're going to be able to buy that big house. You're going to buy mama a big house. And you sit there and little Ray Ray do everything you tell him to do. Little Ray Ray go to school, get his high school diploma. He go to college and he come out, and then it's no damn jobs waiting for little Ray Ray. I remember an article dropped, Brother T, in the Baltimore Sun. This was in the 2000s, around the time that I had graduated with my bachelor's in electrical engineering. So it's a few years after that. So I came out in 2003. And probably about 4 or 5 years later, there was an article that dropped in the Baltimore Sun that talked about how a lot of people, a lot of black college graduates can't find any work. So you didn't took out all of these school loans, right? You owe thousands of dollars in school loans. You have this pretty piece of paper sitting on your wall, right? Because that's what it is a piece of paper sitting on your wall. And I'm not knocking degrees. I have them. You people who know connected with me know I have them. But I'm just trying to bring home a point here that it's a myth. You can do you not. It's a myth. All you got to do is go to get your education and everything will be okay. That's not true. It's not true that everything will be okay if you just go to school. That's not true. We up against a behemoth. We are up against a beast. We are playing a rigged game and don't understand it, Brother T. All right, let me go ahead. Let me go ahead past the mic. Go ahead.
Good gracious, Dr. Ma, you be lighting up the flame. I gotta put that out. I gotta put it out. I be lighting up the path and expect somebody to walk right after her. But Dr. Ma, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct in what you say. We look at this, and I remember you mentioning early on in this discussion about information you were saying from Michelle Alexander, talking about how we 12%, the 12%. Can you repeat that part again before I go on?
So she said that we only have a 12.5% chance, or 12.5% chance for upward mobility. She said that in her book, The New Jim Crow.
All right. So we in the Robert Rothstein goes on and talks about these quintiles, if I pronounced that correct.
Yes.
Said, imagine we lined up all American families in order of their incomes from highest to lowest, and then divide that line into 5 equal groups. In the discussion of mobility, it is usually called the richest fifth of the top quintile, the next richest fifth, the fourth quintile, and so on. If we are fully an equal opportunity society, and no society is, he points out, children whose parents have incomes in the bottom quintile of the income distribution will have equal chances of having incomes as adults anywhere in that distribution, right? But in other words, of children in the bottom quintile, one fifth would remain as adults in the bottom quintile. Another fifth would have incomes in the fourth quintile. But let's cut the chase. He states that, in fact, however, the United States has less mobility. However, the United States has less mobility than many other industrialized societies of American children born to parents whose incomes were in the bottom income quintile. Almost half, 43%, remain trapped in the bottom quintile as adults. Only 30% of children born to parents in the lowest earning quintile make it to the middle quintile or higher. So let's break that down for a second. Dr. Mahat mentioned that earlier in the discussion, how if you have parents who were in economic destitute situation, usually the children will also have that same condition, same predicament, because nothing is passed to that child in order for it to go any higher. So they live in the same neighborhoods. They forced to live in the same neighborhoods. Why? Because they can go live in the neighborhood that they had the money and the resources, but yet they stay in the same neighborhoods that has less resources, homes that don't have any equity built into them, jobs that only they can do based off education levels. So, not saying everyone is locked in, but they say a small percentage gets to that next quintile, as Michelle Alexander was mentioning before, right? So African Americans has less mobility. That's the point we're trying to make, right? So for those born to parents in the bottom income quintile, only half, 53%, remain there as an adults, and only a quarter, 26%, make it to the middle quintile or higher.
Mm.
Considering the disadvantages the low income African Americans had a result of segregation, poor access to jobs, which I just mentioned, and
Mm-hmm.
to schools, can't get a college education unless they take a loan out. There's no equity to grab from the home. So, and to schools where they can excel. It's surprising their mobility compared to other Americans isn't even lower. Two explanations come to mind. One is that African Americans heed the warning that they have to be twice as good to succeed and exhibit more than average hard work, responsibility, ambition to supplement a little luck. The other is that the affirmative action programs have been moderately successful. Probably some of both are involved. So, in that, what I'm reading is that I remember my mother telling me when it's time for me to go to school. She didn't want me to go to the military. My father, being from Liberia, like no son of mine is going to fight for this country. He
That's
wasn't
right.
playing. He wasn't playing that, and I wanted to go to the Marines. I did, because this was my friends in high school. That's where they was going. So I had to make some choice. So I decided to go to college. My mother didn't have money to go to school. She like, I think you should go down to Enoch Pratt Library. You just go down down there to read the books and learn what to do from that, because I can't afford no college. So I had to take out loans. I had to go to community college for a second. Then once I was able, when I moved out by myself, there's a law. You got your own place, your own rent, your own gas and electric. You can apply at a certain age for these loans. I think at the age of 22 or 23. I can't remember, but that's when I was able to apply for the loan, because my parents did not have the monies. So I understand this. My mother didn't finish high school. My father didn't graduate high school in this country. So I didn't have an idea how it looked to go to that next level, because where I grew up, not many of us was going to college. until we watched the Cosby Show, and then we got motivated to go to Hillman, you know. But it was because of the projections we saw on TV. You understand? So not many of us got to that next level because there was nothing there to get us to that point. So I understand this chapter 100% about not able to move to the next step without the funds and the ability. So I kind of felt this more because I could relate to exactly what was being said. And even as a college graduate now, working in the medical field, I still struggle to that next step. How am I going to reach down and take my children to the next step? That's something that we all struggle with. Even if we did get to the point of, okay, let's go for the American dreaming, be college educated, move into our homes and work the good jobs. How am I going to take $40,000 to $50,000 a year for the average education for 4-year education to provide that for my children? That's a lot of money.
Right.
It's a we're behind the eight ball when it comes to that. So what are we going to do
Mm.
if we choose to bring our kids that route? You know, so this chapter, that part of the chapter, kind of hit home a little bit, Dr. Mahat. You
No,
know,
no, no, absolutely. And look, Sister Crystal Denise, she said, that's the question, Brother T, with an exclamation point. Absolutely. Like you said, it hit home. And it hit home for me because I started even thinking about, compatibility and how, how when we come together is we've been sold on this, let me just marry for love idea. I just want to grow up. Girl, I want him to look like this, or I want her to look like this. You get what I'm saying? And it's just marry for love. It's like, no, boo boo. We got to, I have a whole list that I had put out there on my page some years ago, and it actually went viral. And I give it out to my students at Morgan. And so, because they're like my children. So I have all kinds of conversations with my students. But when you talk about compatibility, what does those economics look like? You get what I'm saying, Brother T? That income, your income, my income, we trying to build, what we trying to, so I thought about that, my economic situation, but then I started thinking about a compatibility, in terms like what can we build together with your income and with my income? What does that look like? What type of life will we be able to afford? And what, like you said, in terms of sending our children to college, what does that look like? So I started thinking about stuff like that, Brother T, while I was reading the chapter. And so I don't want to give it away because we're going to move into that stuff in a few pages. And so at the bottom, he moves the conversation into a wealth versus income conversation. And Thomas Shapiro talked about that in his book, Hidden Cost of Being African American, as well. So when I read the next 2 pages, I honestly thought about that book. And so, family, if you haven't, and Brother T and I keep referencing these books, the books that we have been referencing, The Hidden Cost of Being an African American, Birth of a Nation, the Booker T. Washington, we had those discussions are right here on this channel. All you had to do is click on the playlist and you'll see all of the different conversations all of the books that we've gone through, that we've read, that we've discussed. And so even if you haven't read the book, or you never read it, you don't own the book, go listen to the discussions. Okay, because we summarize all of the chapters. Go listen to the discussions. I mean, some of you all listen to audio books anyway. Go listen to the discussions. All right. And so in section 3, he moves the conversation to, wealth, well, moves it, into wealth versus income. So he says the median white family income is now $60,000, while the median black family income is about $37,000, about 60% as much. You might expect the ratio of black to white household wealth would be similar. He says, but median white household wealth assets, assets minus liabilities, that's in parentheses, is about $134,000. Whoa, wait a minute. Let me say that again. So the median white family income is 60,000. The median black family income is 37,000. The median white household wealth is 134,000, while the median black household wealth is $11,000. It says less than 10% as much, right? So he goes on to say that equity that families have in their homes is the main source of wealth for middle class Americans. Hold on, Brother T. I have an asterisk next to that statement. Equity that families have in their homes is the main source of wealth for middle class Americans. So, Brother T, if you don't own a home and your home, so if you don't own a home, right? Or let's say you own a
Mhm.
home in an area and it's not appreciating, right?
Right.
So let's say you own a home in an area, it's not appreciating, it's undervalued. So you're not accumulating equity, or you don't own a home at all.
Hmm.
You're not building wealth.
Right.
I mean, unless you playing the crypto game or you got a business or you doing something else. But he tells us that owning a home is the main source of wealth for Americans. So do we see, Brother T, how they locked us out of wealth?
Hmm.
They literally locked us out because we were prohibited, we were prevented from owning a home, which is the main source of wealth in America,
That's
home
right.
ownership. So if you don't own a home, you're locked out. You're locked
Hmm.
out. But let's go back. So he talks about that at the top, and he gives us a bunch of stats, family, like after this sentence. But I want to move down to page 185. Well, Brother T, did you want to read those stats?
Yeah, I think
Uh,
we should these break them down a little
Okay, go
bit.
ahead. You go ahead, break down the stats, and I'll go at the end of the
So
page
that,
once you finish.
okay, we had page 185, family. Dr. Mahad brought out a beautiful point about just the equity. Cannot miss that because that was such a head start. And we'll be so behind if we tried to do that now with homes being $250,000. We only put 20, but $70,000 down. We're not hitting too much equity, family. So we can't take the benefit of those years, over 20, 30, 40 years of equity built into that home that's been usually passed down to the next generation, right? So we're behind the eight ball when it comes down to that. So equity that the families have in their homes is the main source of wealth for middle class Americans, African American families today, whose parents and grandparents were denied participation in the equity accumulation boom of the 1950s and the 1960s, have great difficulty catching up now. That's what I was trying to say. So, as with income, there's a little mobility by wealth in America. In fact, the intergenerational wealth mobility is even less than the intergenerational income mobility. That's crazy.
Mm,
So let's go in. So the equal opportunity society with respect to wealth would operate similarly to equal opportunity society with respect to income. No matter how wealthy your parents, you would have an equal chance as an adult of ending up anywhere in the national wealth distribution. But nearly half, that's 41% of children born to parents in the least wealthy fifth of American families remain in the lowest quintile as adults. Another 25% make it to the next lowest wealth quintile, meaning that one third of children born to the least wealthy American families make it as high as the middle quintile in wealth. So it's true with income, African Americans are less mobile in wealth than whites. Fewer than one fourth of African American adults whose parents are in the bottom wealth quintile make it to the middle wealth quintile. Nearly twice as many, as 42%, white adults whose parents were in the lowest wealth quintile make it that far. So since African Americans were mostly prevented by government and racial policy from owning single family homes in the suburbs, it is not surprising that it would be that way, right? So it's
facts.
surprising that this would be so. This difference becomes especially significant in the white families and are more often to borrow from their home equity if necessary to wealthier medical emergencies, send their children to college, retire without becoming dependent on those children,
Yep.
retire without becoming dependent on those children, retire without becoming dependent on those children,
Say it,
aid
Brother
family
T.
members experiencing hard times, or endure brief periods of joblessness, such as the recession, such as 2008, without fear of losing a home or going hungry. If none of these emergencies consume their savings or home equity, families can bequeath wealth to the next generation.
Mhm.
Because of those benefits, they can handle all the atrocities that happen to all Americans way better than Black Americans. So in 1989, the most recent year for which such data are available, 6% of Black households inherited wealth from their previous generation. Look at the numbers. One of those inherited wealth, the average inheritance was $42,000. That's four times as many white households. 24% inherited wealth, and the average inheritance was 145,000. So compared to maybe a policy of 42,000, the average white inheritance was 145,000. And that year, 18% of Black households received cash gifts from parents who were still living, that's like parental welfare, but in the average amount of $800. I'm sorry.
Don't let Brother T
It's
like
not. It's not
it's
funny
not funny, but it's like just looking at the situation.
because
It's like, man, especially when you start talking numbers, you make it real clear. You make it crystal clear when you talk numbers.
because I just heard 145,000, and then I'm thinking, okay, good. We are leaving monies to our children, and I'm getting the build up until I see the average amount is $800. About the same share of white households received such gifts, but the average is 2,800, which is much greater. This too is the consequence of government's 20th century racial policy in housing and income. And it comes down to even today when they always shared the numbers of us having $11,000 net worth and less than $1,000 saved in our saving account for emergencies. We can't even get to the point that we need 2 to 3 months of emergency funds to cover all bills when some families have anywhere from 6 months to a year to cover any emergencies if need be. So we're going into 2023, family, and they said the recession is sure to happen. Are you prepared? Do you have your monies, your 2 to 3 months, your 6 to 12 months? Do you have your storage of food stacked up? Do you have everything you need for your automobiles? Everything you need for your home? Do you have that extra room for that family member who don't have the
Come on, Brother
ability to
T.
keep it together? Because
Come
it
on.
shows here, it shows in this book that they did. They do have it. Or are you going to lock your doors and keep them out and let them deal with the wiles of the world? So
Mm,
this chapter once again is, as we've been reading thus far, is hitting home because this is happening to our communities, and these numbers are dismal. You know, and it makes you think about you think about how many people feel horrible because they're not prepared and
hmm
they can't realize figure out like why am I not prepared? I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. So it's these the reasons are in these pages of this book. You know what I'm saying? And I love that we're discussing it right now.
No, absolutely, Brother T. And I just want to say, you're right, it's coming. Inflation numbers are up. The housing market is crazy right now.
Hmm.
The rent is high. You want to live in a decent neighborhood. You paying $2,000 a month in rent. It's crazy. You get gas prices are
Hmm.
up. We're in a recession now. People struggling. I always say, black people, we've been in a recession. So I always say we've been in a
Yeah.
recession.
Hmm.
That's the white folk stuff. We're in a recession. We've been in a recession since we
Hmm.
got over here. Technically, I mean, you get what I'm saying, Brother T. But like you said, something is coming. It's going to get worse than what it already is. And so you put a challenge out there, Brother T, to the listening audience. You asked, are we prepared? Are we prepared for that? I remember you and I, and I'm just being transparent with the audience, Brother T. You and I had a conversation, and you asked me. You said if something were to happen, you said if you would have lost, your job, your income today or tomorrow, you said how long would you be able to pay your bills? Until like how long would you be able to pay your bills and sustain yourself? And remember, I said, Brother T, maybe a few months. Remember, I said maybe a few months, maybe 3 to 6 months, I'll be able to, you know, sustain just solely on income, not on the equity, pulling out equity, no loans. But I'm just saying, just strictly on what I have saved and just what I have saved. I said a few months, and you was like, that's not good, sis. You said, you need to save up, at least have a year. I think you said a year or 2 years. Was it a year, Brother T? You said,
I said 2 years is great, but at least a year.
yeah,
Because
that's what you
it
said.
takes about 6 months just to find a new job,
Yeah,
depending
so
on
you
your
said, yeah,
qualifications.
yeah. So you said if you lose your income, what you gonna do? I said, well, I'll be okay for a few months. You said a few months is not good. You said you need to be putting away money, putting away, building your savings up, so that a year you're good to go. And Brother T, you and I had that conversation about what, maybe a year or two ago. I know it was
Mm-hmm.
around that time.
Time go.
And so ever since we had that conversation, I just been put a little aside to make sure if that day ever comes
Yeah.
that I have a cushion. And so
Right.
anyway, brother T, I had to share that with the audience. So anyway, family, are you prepared? Like he said, do you have some food saved, water saved, right? Cans of soup, anything? Do you have that stuff put away? Like he said, do you have a spare bedroom for your family members who may need a place to lay their heads? Are we prepared? And if you're not prepared, this is your charge tonight to get prepared. All right, so moving on to section 4, Brother T. He mentions this book that was created by Patrick Sharkley, a New York University sociologist who analyzed data on race and neighborhood conditions and reported his findings in his book. It's a 2013 book called Stuck in Place. And so he defines a poor neighborhood as one where 20% of the families have incomes below the poverty line. In 2016, the poverty line was about $21,000 for a family of three. It says in a neighborhood where 20% of the families have incomes below poverty, many more families are likely to have incomes just above it. Notwithstanding the government's official poverty line, most of us would consider families to be poor if they had incomes that were below twice that line. That's a fact. When I read that, Brother T, in my mind, I was thinking like poverty, we looking at about 50,000 or less, probably in that. So I did not know the official poverty line was 21,000. I didn't know that because in my mind I was thinking it would be somewhere around 40s and 50,000, especially when you're a family of three. So my assessment was definitely in the ballpark. So he says that most of us would consider families to be poor if they had incomes that were below twice that line, which is 42,000 for a family of three. The federal government itself considers children whose family incomes are nearly twice the poverty line. So that means if you're a family of three and you're making about $42,000, those children qualify for free lunch. So what does that mean? If they're giving you free lunch, they mean they consider you poor. That's where they put you. Okay. And so it says families like theirs are also unable to move to middle class neighborhoods, either by saving for down payments or by renting apartment at market rates. So Sharkley is reasonable when he considers such neighborhoods to be poor. He says he finds that young African Americans from 13 to 28 years old are now 10 times as likely to live in poor neighborhoods as young whites. 66% of African Americans compared to 6% of whites. He finds that 67% of African Americans' families, it says, hailing from the poorest quarter of neighborhoods a generation ago, continue to live in such neighborhoods today. So this gives credence, family, that you inherit the social economic status of your family. He says, but only 40% of white families who lived in the poorest quarter of neighborhoods a generation ago still do. 48% of African American families at all income levels have lived in poor neighborhoods over the last two generations, compared to 7% of white families. So they're saying almost half of us at some point, Brother T, have lived in a poor neighborhood. I know I have. I know I have. And what we define by poor, because some of us don't think we poor, Brother T. I remember my buddy Finesse. Shout out to Finesse, DJ DUI. Okay, he goes by King Freeman now. But I remember years ago, he's like, yo, we poor. I was a teenager at this time at the time. He's like, yo, we poor. And I got offended, brother T. I said, I ain't poor. I'm like 15, 16, brother T at the time. So we talking like 96, 97, right? So I'm looking at him. I'm offended. What do you mean poor? I'm not poor. He said, yo, he said, your mother, she bought that house flat out or she got a mortgage on it? I said, Mommy got a mortgage on it. He said, what about that car? She riding around in and the car, y'all. You buy that or you got the, what about credit cards? You have credit cards? So he's going through things. He said if you was wealthy or rich or something, wouldn't she swipe the card and got it? Like he started talking about loans and interest rates and economic traps. And I'm like, wow, we really do belong to the poor working class. Because in my mind at 15, 16, poor to me was the homeless guy on Martin Luther King Boulevard holding the sign that said, I need some food. So I considered that poor. Poor to me was the homeless people who used to be under the bridge, Brother T, at the corner of Saratoga and Marlboro, no, Saratoga and Martin Luther King, right? Underneath the bridge over there. That's what I considered poor. No, we belong to the poor working class. Your income under 150, you under 200,000, you in the poor working class like everybody else. That's real talk, Brother T. But I didn't understand that at that time. And so moving on, he says 48%, blah, 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 blah. He said if a child grows up in a poor neighborhood, moving up and out to a middle class area is typical for whites, but an aberration for African Americans. And I have this and I underlined this. Neighborhood poverty is thus more multi-generational for African Americans and more episodic for whites. So they made it at one point and then they okay, they move up. But they're saying for us, grandma lived in Section 8, then grandma lived in Section 8, then her mama probably she lived in the Section 8, then her daughter probably in the Section 8, and it keeps going and going and going, Brother T. So he says the consequences of being exposed to neighborhood poverty. I started thinking about our babies, Brother T, in this paragraph, okay? So these are the consequences of being exposed to neighborhood poverty. One, it says few adult role models who have been educationally and occupationally successful. Two, their ability to do well in school is compromised from stress that can result from exposure to violence. Three, they have few, if any, summer opportunities. Four, libraries and bookstores are less accessible. Five, there are fewer primary care physicians. Six, fresh food is harder to get. Seven, airborne pollutants are more present, leading to greater school absence from respiratory illness. And eight, the concentration of many disadvantaged children in the same classroom deprives each child of special attention needed to be successful. So, Brother T, with that being said, we sit here and wonder why the scores are low. Why are the test scores low in Baltimore City? Why are the reading and the math scores low in Baltimore City? Well, if these children are living in an impoverished neighborhood, Brother T, some of these children, I had the pleasure of speaking with some of them on Pennsylvania and North Avenue. I actually took Jalen down there. And because he was acting up. And I started talking to him about, you're blessed, you're in a situation. Da, da, da. So I took him down around the way. I took him down to Pennsylvania, North Avenue. And we were out there, Brother T, this is about 8, 9 o'clock. We out there with some children, dope dealers out there, dope fiends out there. And we just out there having conversations with people. And, a lot of those children said to Jalen, man, I wish I had a mom. I don't know where my mother is. One girl said, my mother lives in and out of those abandoned. So in Baltimore, we have a lot of boarded up homes. So one girl shared with Jalen, she was just outside. She said, man, I don't know where my mother is. She get high and she lives in these different, abandoned houses. One boy walked up to Jalen. He was 15. He told Jay, he said, man, he said, your mother take good care of you. He said, you got on glasses, a pea coat, and some nice sneakers. He said, man, if she wasn't out here with you, I would have robbed you. He said, man, my mother's on drugs and my daddy's in jail. He don't want me. This is the story. These are the stories, Brother T. You get what I'm saying? The dope dealers were talking to him. They was like, man, I wish y'all living out there. Oh, man. You got your own room, your own shower. Oh, man. They having conversations telling them, man, you're very fortunate. Because the reality is, Brother T, those brothers and sisters, those young brothers and sisters in the community, some of them are getting forced into gangs. The gang members are saying, look, hey, hey, while they walking to school, you better join. If you don't join up with us, we're going to beat you. Every time you leave your step and you walk to that bus stop, we're going to beat you until you join our gang. So they're forced into joining gangs. Some of them are forced into selling drugs. They turn 13, 14, dudes rolling up, sell this and bring me back X amount of dollars. And you want, they hearing gunshots, Brother T, at night. A lot of our kids are suffering from PSTD. What is it? PTSD. A lot of our children suffer from PTSD. They're stressed out. They're walking outside, Brother T, and you see shrines up the next day, teddy bears wrapped around the pole because somebody got shot. Everybody talking about it in the neighborhood. You know, so-and-so got shot. This is what our children are going through. Drug-addicted parents, abuse. Don't let me get to molestation. Peace be upon her soul. Dr. Patricia Newton brought it out that in Baltimore, 9 out of 10 girls have been molested before the age of 18, and 8 out of 10 boys are molested, because we never talk about the boys. They get molested too. And when she brought those stats out a few years back, T, I almost cried in the audience. They're being sexually abused. So you got pedophilia. Jalen and I, when we were on Pennsylvania and North Avenue, Brother T, we met a guy out there who was trans. And you know what he told us? He shared his story. I said, well, what happened? He told Jalen he ran away from home, went to a pastor's house. He was 12, and the pastor turned him out. And we sit back and say, dang, why are they not doing well in school? Why are they failing? Well, if you had to worry about where your parents are, food, bills, clothes. I remember my mother when she was working at Harlem Park Elementary School. She used to take uniforms down there, Brother T. You know what I'm talking about, off of Lafayette and Fulton. Lafayette and Fulton. When my mother was a school principal, she used to give those children clean uniforms when they came to school, and she took towels, washcloths, and towels down there and soap so they could wash up in the school bathroom. And we expect them, Brother T, to excel in school. And there's some people logging off. Of course, every time we start talking, when the focus is on the babies, that's when we got to log off. All right. So I felt some type of way when I read this particular paragraph, Brother T. I started thinking about Dr. Amos Wilson's book, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child, because he talks about how poverty impacts the development of their psychology. He talked about low achievement motivation. He said, man, they don't even want to achieve anything. He talked about that. When you're faced with poverty or impoverished conditions. In that book, he also talked about low extension need. You don't think of anything beyond yourself. So he goes on to say, Brother T, instability and stress resulting from parental unemployment, fewer literacy experiences when parents are poorly educated, more overcrowded living arrangements that offer few quiet corners to study, and less adequate health care, all of which contribute to worse average school performance, and as a result, less occupational success as adults. You know what's sad, Brother T? And we expect them to go out the state, the Yurugu, expect our children to perform at the same level as their children. But again, our babies are living in these poor neighborhoods. And these white children do not have the same challenges that these black children have. But yet, there's the expectation that these black children should perform at the same level, if not higher. So ending this section, he says, the cycle can be broken only by a policy as aggressive as that which created ghettos of concentrated poverty in the first place. Oh my gosh. Let me read that again, Brother T.
Wake them up.
It says the cycle can be broken only by policy as aggressive as that which created ghettos of concentrated poverty in the first place. In the first place, policy. So we run around here, economic power, yes, but Dr. Claude Anderson and Dr. Amos Wilson advocated for both. They said we need political power and we need economic power. Got a lot of brothers and sisters running around, oh, it's just economic power. No, they said economic power and political power. W.E.B. Du Bois talked about political power. You see what I'm saying? Then you have, I'm trying to think who else. You got your boy, what's the brother name? Dr. Jared Ball in his book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. He's like political power. So you have some of our thinkers are saying we need both, and some of them saying go for economic power, and some of them saying, nah, we need political power. We need policies. Only policy is going to be what's going to be able to transform our communities. And so that's what our thinkers are saying right now, Brother T. But go ahead and weigh in on it, brother.
Policies, economics without policies is ridiculous. You can't, policy alone can stop you from doing anything. Policies, if they want to put policies in place, it will stop your money. By policy can stop the flow of your money.
Facts.
Majority of the people who talk about economics step on a court and make $200,000. They go perform on stage and make $50,000.
Mm.
They got brand deals. They're the ones talking about if we pool our money together. How can you pull your money together when you look at situations like so? When poverty is $21,000 and a family of four making $47,000. Where is the disposable income in order to say I'm gonna make this $300 I have left over at the end of the month flip into 600,000? Then you got the charlatans in the community to say I can take that $600 and I can turn the 600,000. Before you know it, that money's wiped out, just like the blockchain and all these other scams. Because they understand that people need something in order to flip. They sell the dream for people who don't understand the situation they're in, so they fall for it. So it comes about the next chapter. I think this is 5, based off of, I pronounced it incorrectly first up. It's disparate
Yes.
impacts.
Yes.
So because Americans were greatly in their economic and social circumstance, any government program will affect different Americans differently, even if one on its face the program treats all alike. So they try their best to say, well, this policy will help everyone. It's impossible for it to help everyone the same because, as Dr. Ma'at clearly described, majority of us are under attack. They knew the difference between projects and single family homes. They already knew that more crime is created in those projects than would be in single family home communities. They understood that, hey, put the blacks in these type of homes, but we need these type of homes. The once the purpose of the projects were over for them, they knew the best suit for that family was to put them in the suburbs. Why? Because everything that they will benefit from that point on will be benefited for that family based off of resources. And putting us in these smaller, more filled spaces with less resources will start prisons, will start
Mm.
criminals, will get us from the high school to prison pipeline instead of the high school to the trade school to the college to the business pipeline. They understood these things. And I remember us talking about that in that later on in these chapters, how those projects created a certain type of people. They knew it. So when it comes down to this part of the chapter, it states that a sales tax, for example, applies equally to all, but will be more of a burden to lower income consumers than higher income ones. The legal jargon for this has been a disparate impact on different groups in society where everyone's situation is different. A disparate impact are unavoidable, but we can try to minimize them in the case of sales tax by exempting the grocery purchases. So, once again, just because the law is across the board, there's certain people or there's we're gonna respond differently to it based off because we already in a bad economic spot. So even if you say we're gonna give a lenient sales tax, some people you don't have you know what say hey forget the sales tax, just give the food to them for free because a lower sales tax is not going to help. It's not going to make their benefit make their life better. You know what I'm saying? So the jure segregation was established. African Americans and whites were not affected similarly by subsequent race neutral policies. The Fair Housing Act prohibits housing programs which the disparate impact on African Americans reinforces segregation unless the programs have a legitimate purpose that cannot be accomplished otherwise. But the Housing Act does not prevent disparate impacts from other non-housing programs that build on pre-existing residential patterns. So several seemingly race-neutral programs have reinforced the disadvantages of African Americans that were initially created by race-conscious housing policy. So
Facts.
basically, this whole thing just saying, I'm saying, family is that no matter what they put into place, this supposed to remedy our situation, it never really did because we were already put in a bad situation by the time it came. So it benefited whites to get tax rates have to pay less because they had more monies. We it didn't even budge. It didn't help our situation because we was in communities that had Section 8 and it had no resources. There was no benefit, and then we couldn't even move in the suburbs to benefit because they would not accept the Section 8 and things that could help that really helped us. So we were still once again locked in to a certain community. And based off what's going to be talking about next is the transportation and other things that happen even here in Baltimore, Dr. Mott.
All right. So basically, Brother Teed, in those two, so you said you ended by saying that several seemingly race neutral programs have reinforced the disadvantages of African Americans that were initially created by race conscious housing policies. So now he's moving us into what those race neutral programs are. He describes one, the mortgage interest deduction, right? So it says, along with the mortgage interest deduction, it says another policy. And hold on, let's revisit the mortgage interest deduction. Basically, Brother T and Sister Crystal, tell me in the chat, I believe with this particular program, you could write off the interest that you pay. You have the right, you could use it as a write-off on your taxes. And so what that means was then you'll owe less taxes. But if I don't have a house with a mortgage and an interest to write off, then as an African American, what am I going to do? I'm going to end up paying more taxes, right? And so again, this again impacts the whole racial wealth gap, right? So now I'm paying more in taxes than a white person who owns, their home. So I believe that was the mortgage interest deduction program. But he says another policy that on its face is race neutral but has a discriminatory effect is our national transportation system. He said we have invested heavily in highways to connect commuters to their downtown offices, but comparatively little in buses, subways, and light rails to put suburban jobs within the reach of urban African Americans and to reduce their isolation from the broader community. So basically, family, they're saying we invest in a highway system, right, which will connect the suburbs to downtown. But what about the subways to connect the subways to downtown? A lot of white folks, Brother T, They don't live with it. They always say, I'm not going to live where the subway runs or where the bus line is, because that gives black people access to those neighborhoods. Even some jobs, they'll say, I'm not going to put my job on a bus line or on the subway route because I don't want them working at this particular job. It is true, family. So it says right here, although in many cases, urban spheres of the interstate highway system were unconstitutionally routed to clear African Americans away from white neighborhoods and businesses, that was not the system's primary purpose. And the decision to invest limited transportation funds in highways rather than subways and buses has had a disparate impact on African Americans. So I highlighted this. He says transportation policies that affected the African American population in Baltimore illustrate those followed throughout the country. I said, daggone, Brother T. They rolled out Red Line and they did it in Baltimore
Yep.
first. You know, we're like the guinea pigs. They did it in Baltimore first, and then they said, well, we can, now that we see it works in Baltimore, we'll roll it out to all of the other cities.
Most definitely. Yep.
You get what I'm saying? And so they even did that with the transportation system. So it says over 4 decades, successive proposal for rail lines or even a highway to connect African American neighborhoods to better opportunities have been scuttled because finances were short, and building expressways to serve suburbanites was a higher priority. It says isolating
Hmm.
African Americans was not the stated purpose of Maryland's transportation decisions, though there also may have been some racial motivation. So he goes on to say that in 1975, when Maryland proposed a rail line to connect suburban Anne Arundel County and downtown Baltimore, white suburbanites pressed their political leaders to oppose the plan. They was like, we don't want them coming out here. They're going to steal our TVs. They're going to steal our cars. This is what he said in the paragraph.
Yes.
This is what the white folks were saying.
I,
We don't
I
want
was
no
waiting
right.
for that.
Yeah, we don't want no light rail coming out here to where we live. They're going to steal our TVs. And then they're going to, what did it say? Steal our TVs. It says, and then return to their ghettos. And this is in quotes. This is what the white folks were saying. So they were like, don't run a rail line out here. But they pressured their politicians to shoot down the proposal. So then he goes on to say, 40 years later, little had changed. In 2015, Maryland's governor canceled a proposal rail link to Baltimore's West Side black neighborhood, saying the funds were needed for highway improvement. So what does that mean, family? It's like you're locked in, you're isolated, like he said, from the broader community. So if our youth say, oh, well, they're paying good, they're getting paid out there, I can catch the light rail or the subway, out into the county because there's some businesses that pay some money. How are you going to get there if you don't have a vehicle? Because the bus line is not going there. The light rail isn't going out there. The subway isn't going out there. So how are you going to get there? All right. So the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, they filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Transportation, claiming that Maryland's priority for highways over mass transit had a disparate impact on African Americans. And it says the case was still pending when Obama administration left office.
Repeat
Well,
that again, Dr. Mott.
I
Please
want to
repeat
say
that.
so the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, they filed a complaint right
Mm-hmm.
against the U.S. Filed a complaint charging the U.S. Department of Transportation, with claiming that their priority for highways over mass transit had a disparate impact on African Americans, and it says the case was still pending when the Obama administration left office.
This was supposed to help African Americans get to higher paying jobs that were not in their community. So when you ask the question, what has Obama did for us? Absolutely nothing.
Come on.
Something like this would at least give us the mobility to be to higher paying jobs. But it was set in his office for 8 years. Because we have to think about this. He didn't serve one term; he served two. So 8 years, this thing set, and he did nothing about it. In a Democratic place.
He was
You know,
what, Brother T? What was he?
Democrat. I mean, I'm Democrat. I'm sorry. My speech impediment.
No, no,
I'm
he was a
kind of
Democrat. Oh, my bad. You said a Democrat. Okay,
yes.
okay.
There you
Right.
go.
And then we right out there every election. We right out there every election voting. You got a D next to it. Make sure you vote. Democrat. And let me say this, because some people may say, they caping for the Republican Party. No, we're
Heck
not.
no.
No, we're not. We're just saying that you out here voting for people. You're voting for this political party who clearly doesn't do anything for black people. They don't do anything for you. They even told you. Kamala said it when they say, "You going to do anything specifically for black people?" She said, "I'm not going to do anything." Brother T, we rolled that. We kept playing that clip over and over again.
Right.
I might put that as one of my little snippets. Oh, I'm not going to do anything explicitly for black people. No.
Yeah.
She said no. And you keep voting those folks and all. We were fool. The black folks went out there. Brother T, this is when I realized how much we are controlled. And family, we're coming down to the wire. We only got like 2-3 pages. But this is when I realized how controlled we are. Did you notice, when the media started pushing the we got to get Trump out of office, we got to get Trump out of office. Then
Hmm.
black folks started saying it. Even in my family, even in my family, we got to get Trump out of office. They started repeating it. All the elders in the family. I was like, you all need to cut off the news. Y'all need, and I'm not saying that Trump should have stayed. All I'm saying is we go along with the dominant society instead of thinking for ourselves. So if the dominant society says you all need to go out and vote, we got to get Trump out of office. Black folks are going to run out there and vote because they're listening to the dominant society, their perspective, day in and day out. And so then we start parroting the ideas of white folks, literally, family, literally. All right, and so moving on to section 6, and like I said, we only have about 3 pages, family. So I'm gonna fly with this. So the another program he says actions of government and housing cannot be neutral about segregation. They will either exacerbate it or reverse it. Right. So it says without taking care to do otherwise, exacerbation is more likely. The federal government now operates 2 large programs to address the housing crisis faced by the poor and near poor, most of whom in many metropolitan areas are African American. Without an intent to do so, each program has been implemented in the manner that deepens racial segregation. Okay. So he says, one, the low income housing tax credit subsidizes developers whose multi-unit projects are available to low income families. The other is housing choice vouchers, so popularly known as Section 8, subsidizes families' rental payments so they can lease housing that they would not otherwise be able to afford. So it says in the tax credit program, communities can veto developers' proposals. I'm sorry. Let me read that again. In the tax credit program, communities can veto developers' proposals, something that officials in middle class areas don't hesitate to do. Many policymakers urge developers to build in already segregated neighborhoods in the hope, usually a vain one, that their projects will revitalize deteriorating areas. So, the low income house tax credit is supposed to subsidize the developers, right, to build, projects, or multi-unit projects in, middle class areas, right, with the hopes to integrate these white middle class areas. But they veto it down, they knock down the proposal, so then they end up putting the developments or the projects or the units in segregated communities where we already are. So hence, what are we doing? Reinforcing. What does that do? It reinforces segregation. So moving on, it says, at the bottom, it says an analysis of all tax credit units nationwide completed through 2005 found that about 3/4 were placed in neighborhoods where poverty rates were at least 20%. Moving on to Section 8. He says in the Section 8 program, landlords in most states and cities can legally refuse to rent to tenants who use housing vouchers, although in few jurisdictions prohibit such discrimination. The voucher amount is usually too small to allow for rentals in middle class areas. Okay, a family that receives a voucher may find that the only way to take advantage of it is to move to a neighborhood even more segregated than the one where they were already living. As a result, few families with children who use Section 8 vouchers rented apartments in low poverty neighborhoods in 2010, while over half rented in neighborhoods where the poverty rate was 20% or more, including some who rented where poverty was extreme, 40% more. When vouchers are used to rent suburban apartments, these apartments are frequently in segregated enclaves within otherwise middle class suburbs. So it's like a little area. You get what I'm saying, brother T? Where they if they do so if they do take these vouchers and they rent in suburban apartments, it says these apartments are frequently in segregated enclaves within or enclaves within out otherwise middle class suburbs. So we'll be right in a concentrated area within these suburbs. So it says in 2008, the Inclusive Communities Project, the ICP, a Dallas civil rights group, sued the state of Texas, claiming that the operation of the tax credit program had a disparate impact on African Americans, violating the Fair Housing Act. At the bottom of the page, brother T, and I'm driving it home. Did you want to say anything in between here? I can drive it home with the gentrification. Okay, gentrification of private housing in urban areas, redevelopment projects, and highway routing have forced low income and minority families to search for new accommodations in a few inner ring suburbs that are in transition from white to majority minority. Hold on, brother T. I started thinking about, you know, Randallstown area, Woodlawn, those suburbs that sit out on the outskirts of Baltimore City. And so what happened when we started moving there, white folks got out of there. So again, the neighborhood went from being predominantly white or all white to now predominantly black. All right. So I saw this, brother T, with my own eyes. So it says when the tax credit in Section 8 programs subsidize the movement of low income families into such suburbs and not into predominantly middle class ones, they contribute to segregation. And he gave Ferguson, Missouri as one of them. It says it's right outside of St. Louis. It says it's such a place, right? Where it used to be white, and then it became majority minority over time, due to gentrification of private housing, right? Redevelopment projects, highway routing, et cetera, et cetera. And so we began to move. All right. Brother T, take us home. Last page, family.
Last page, family. Civil, and this is um, Dr. Mott showed some projects here in Baltimore going under um, the blast some years ago. Murphy Homes, just like this last page of this project being taken down here. I believe this was in St. Louis. Matter of fact, well, let's bring this home. So, civil rights advocates and local housing officials face a difficult conundrum. The ongoing income stagnation of working class families and the growing distance between job opportunities and affordable housing makes the need for subsidized housing more pronounced. So, government officials can satisfy more of the need by using scarce Section 8 funds and supporting tax credit developments in segregated neighborhoods where rent and land are cheaper and where white middle class voters place fewer hurdles in the way. In the long run, however, African Americans will be harmed more by the perpetration of segregation than the continued overcrowding and inadequate living space. Neither is a good alternative, but short term gains may not be worth the long term cost.
Oh, say that one more time, brother T.
The short term gains may not be worth the long term cost.
Mm.
We have to look at exactly what's happening. We think that the fact that we've been locked out of the opportunity to move in suburbs early on, from the 50s all the way up to today, and we finally let in. But we have all of these other obstacles that keep us away. That's having a good jobs with the income, the ability to have a home with equity, safe places. And we see that this subsidized housing have caused us to still stay in the overcrowded communities. But it says here, neither is a good alternative, even if it's overcrowded. That's not even the worst. The worst situation is the long term effect.
That's right.
How we'll never be able to get out of it. Sister said something earlier in the chat. I don't even try no more.
Mm.
You get to the point that you don't even want to try no more because you're stuck. You have to figure out a way out. And every time we try to figure a way out, what happens? The path gets longer and longer. So it's harder for us to reach the end. Based off the policies, based off the government involvement of yesteryear, it's harder for us to get through it today. Like
Mm.
Shimzu said, we got to vote them out. But they so stuck, we can't vote them out.
That's what he said. He
He
said, he
stated.
said, that's what he said. He said politicians are bought by corporations.
Mhm.
He said, example, political action committees and lobbyists have interest to corporations. We don't live in a democracy, but a
Mhm.
corporatocracy. Ooh, institution control facts. He said, and you can't vote them out. That's what he said.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And Sister Crystal was talking about another book. She said the whiteness of wealth. Isn't that Sister Crystal, a sister named Dorothy? I believe her name is like Dr. Dorothy something. Dr. Dorothy something. Let me know in the chat. I believe that's her name. And so, family, I'm going to try to comb through these comments really quickly. Family, join us back here next week for the last chapter. The last chapter. Brother T, what's the last chapter called? The last chapter, I think he said something about fixes. Something about fixes. Let me get to I'm in frequently asked questions. What was the last chapter? Considering fixes. Considering fixes is the last chapter of this book, family. And so again, there are 4 books that we are going to be reading. There goes my young warrior, Nasir Randall's in the building. Peace to you, Nasir. I'll be checking your exam, man. We're gonna get that exam grade in there, brother. He probably like that. He actually did well, brother T. That's why I'm calling him out. He did well. I know he's gonna pass the class. But that's a Morgan State University student in the building, family. Show him love. Young warriors in the building. Could be somewhere else doing something else. Could be somewhere. Could be somewhere else doing something else.
Most
But he's
definitely.
right. But he's right here with us, learning. Learning and growing, and that's what it's really about. Feeding our young people. And so, anyway, the 4 books, family, that we are going to be reading in 2023. And we're not just going to read 4 books. We'll be reading more than 4 books. I'm just kind of giving you the titles so you can go grab the ones that we are going to start with. All right. And so the first book is They Were Her Property. They Were Her Property by Dr. Stephanie Rogers. They Were Her Property. All right. So that's the first book that we're going to read. Okay. And so after we finish reading chapter 2 after we finish discussing, okay, chapter 2, analyzing and discussing chapter 2 next week, we're going to go on a hiatus. Brother T and I, we are worn out. Okay. Every Sunday, for like the past couple of months, we've been giving up our Sundays, with our families and, and you give it up to you're right here with us grinding the Maadian family. That's why I call them the Maadian family, Brother T. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, we got to get some family, the Maadian family. Shoot, I'm going to get some shirts, Brother T. That's a good idea because the Maadian family is definitely in the building. And I'll get some shirts and send it out to you. But we've been grinding, and so we need a break. We need a break. And so from, after we discuss next week, let me see, that'll be December the 11th. Brother T and I, we won't be back around until probably like the second or third week in January.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We need to at least take a month off, and just kind of, get our minds right. Okay. And so make sure that when we're taking this hiatus that you grab these books. So the first book is They Were Her Property by Dr. Stephanie Rogers. The second book is Slavery by Another Name.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery by Another Name. The third book is When Affirmative Action Was White. When Affirmative Action Was White. Our fourth book, From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. I'm going to repeat those titles again, family. You know, I'm a teacher, so Nasir tell them in the chat, Nasir, that I'm very repetitive. I say everything about 3 times. I always tease my students. I know a lot of them smoke. They smoke Brother T and they do edibles. So I always tell them I repeat 3 times because I said some of y'all didn't catch it, the first time, I understand, And then I say, well,
Mm-hmm.
I know some of y'all went to a kickback. You may have did an edible or smoked something. So I'll repeat it about 3 times until it get to you. All right, he'll tell you.
He said,
I see it tell you in the chat. I don't know if he
yeah,
said
for
anything.
sure.
He said for sure. I repeat everything 3 times in the classroom. All right. So the first title is They Were Her Property by Dr. Stephanie Rogers. Okay, and that deals with white women being slave masters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And a lot of that, you don't get. Over 40% of the slave masters were white women, and they were just as cruel as their male counterpart. But that's the history that they don't tell us
That's right.
about. Okay.
Right.
And so we're going to talk about that history with when we discuss They Were Her Property. The second book, Slavery by Another Name, that deals with some history, during the Jim Crow era that we were not taught. Slavery by Another Name. That's the second title. The third title is When Affirmative Action Was White. I know they keep saying that Black people are the sole, beneficiaries of affirmative action, and we're not. That's a lie. White folks was right in there getting that good old. I mean, they always do it though, brother T. You saw the article I just sent you where
Yes.
they got a reparations program. I'm gonna say a so-called reparations program, but they're saying white people qualify for it too.
Right.
So they always do that. So the affirmative action, don't think that Black folks were the sole beneficiaries of affirmative action. So
5 cent Indians, they've been doing it for a long time,
yeah, the
putting
five
something
dollar
to
Indians. Yeah, the
right on.
$5 Indians, and so taking advantage of those Native American benefits. So they
Mm-hmm.
always, when it's benefits set aside for
Right.
marginalized groups, they always benefit from that. And so anyway, we're going to be dealing with that. So when affirmative action was white, and the fourth title is From Here to Equality. Okay, From Here to Equality by Dr. William Sandy Darity. And so, family, make sure that you go to a Black-owned bookstore. Go to a Black-owned bookstore and grab these books. Okay, so everyone's place is a Black-owned bookstore. Okay, that ships around the world and around the country. Okay, it ships around the world and around the country. And there's Sister Marcia Pender. She said, I can't wait to hear what the book is going to be in January because my class is going to participate in these live discussions. So we're going to have
Awesome.
the youth on this panel, Ashe. And so the book in January is going to be They Were Her Property, Sister Marcia Pender. So that's the book that we chose for January. All right. And someone said, drop the StreamYard link. Van, we getting ready to get out of here, man. Brother T and I have been on here for 2 hours. Usually when we're on for about an hour, I drop the link. Thank you so much, Sister Monica. But I usually drop the link, when we go about an hour, and then Brother T and I just hang for like 30 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
to an hour. But we've been on for 2 hours, really breaking down this chapter. And I see the love, family, that you all are showing us in the chat. Thank you so much, Sister Monica Lamb. She said, great work. Immortal Truth said, you are appreciated, my sister. Tia Thompson, she said, we love and appreciate you both. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Who is this? Miss O? Oh, thank you to brother. He said, salute to you, Brother T. Appreciate all of y'all. Monica laughing at me. It says, Night Rider, it affects your brain cells. Yeah, it does. But our young people, they don't stop them from smoking it, man. So they come in there sometimes smelling loud, and I call it out. They laugh at me. Oh, Doc. I said, man, you're a little loud today. And the students start cracking up, and because I let them know I know what's going on. They think I'm
Mm-hmm.
an old head, Brother T, but I tell them I know what's going on. I know the smell when I smell it. All right. Miracle said, Namaste, Dr. Maad and guest. Thank you for repeating the titles of the book. No problem, fam. Appreciate you. Oracle said, "Oh, brother, look at Baba. Baba said I got 3 of those books. All right,
Already.
Baba. So Baba gonna be in the building. All right, the Pretendians, yeah, Oracle at Delphi, absolutely. Who's this right here? Black folk will never get representations. I guess they meant to say reparations. Move past that and just build somewhere else and stop spending money with their businesses. I
Start.
mean,
It's definitely a start.
yeah, it's yeah,
That's part of the plan as well. But we got to know
absolutely.
what we can and cannot do.
Facts, 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 facts. All right, so let me see. There we go, brother Baba Kerman. What do you say? Strength and honor to you always. Peace and love. All right, family. So we're gonna get out of here. Thank you so much. Next week, join us back here at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to discuss chapter 11 of The Color of Law. What's the name of the chapter again? Oh, considering fixes. Considering fixes. All right, family. So we'll be back live at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. I won't be live at all this week, family. I got some things going on. Things going. I might. I say that. I might, but brother T, I'll be right on the beach, going live, talking about what's up, body and family. The body, because I can't stay. I can't stay away from the Maadi and family, brother T. It's
They
the
can't.
fam.
They can't stay away from you even.
It's the family, man. I love the Maadi and family, man. And so, I probably will go live, but if I do, I'm going to be on the beach. And all I'm gonna
Oh,
do, brother T, is turn the camera the ocean way, and I'm gonna
okay.
have my book look The Color of Law right there. My feet gonna be in the sand, hair gonna be out,
I know
and
that's right.
nice straw hat on, and so anyway, so I might go live from the resort. I may go live, family, but if I don't, have a black-tastic week. All
All
right.
right.
And I want to say Amani Na. I say Amani Na Amandala. And that's my new thing. Amani Na Amandala. Amani Na is in Swahili peace and when I say Amandala, that's power in Zulu. So Amani Na Amandala. Amani Na Amandala. Yeah, peace and power, family. Peace.